And I'm just going to do a little review for the benefit of everybody. Is that the Rambam talked about in his introduction that there's two parts of the Torah. There's what he calls the Torah, which is the written Torah, the Torah Shebechtav, and there's what he called Mitzvah, which is called the oral law. And the question we raise, why do we have both components? Just either do one. Just either have all oral or all written. Why do you have both? We got Laura. So so I'll ask you guys a question. Why do we need both? Why do we have two components?
You almost have to, because one is you always have to have context.
Okay.
Context is always going to be bigger, more basic.
Okay.
I think I read this.
Never say that.
You have to know how to read in order to understand.
Correct. Okay. But put everything into the written law, written Torah. Make it into one big text, or offload into the oral law. Make everything an oral tradition. You have oral traditions about the stories of Avraham and the creation. I mean, you can make them into oral tradition. I mean, it's not impossible to make it all oral.
Well, by having part of it written, it also ensures that it's like there's no room. Yeah, it's tangible, and it's something that you can also see and it's there for other people to see too. Whereas oral, put some responsibility into it, that you're teaching it, that you're talking about. It's not just passive, and you can like look at it.
All true. All true. Now, what I want to share is that there's also an educational devices. They work in two different ways, and you need both things. The written law deals with often broad narratives. Well, this week we'll have the story of Yaakov and Yosef, and he's thrown into the pit and hauled off to Egypt, etc. We have Abraham, we have the creation story, Noah stories, all these different stories. In these stories, you're able to communicate broad ideas. The oral law is going to take these broad themes and ideas and then narrow it down to create a mitzvah structure, which is embodying the context of these narratives. You need both things. You need the broad-based narrative of the Chumash, Tanakh, and then you have the oral law, which is coming and is going to provide structure, a mitzvah structure within that broader context. So that's why you need to always learn with both. So this is our first mitzvah we did was the mitzvah Pruvu, which interestingly enough was given the context of Adam Arishon, who was not commanded to do Pruvu. But that mitzvah is associated there because it gives you the context that when a person's involved in the mitzvah of having children, it's really that you are partnering with God and you are part of civilizing the world. But that mitzvah is only given to people who are truly a part of the Abrahamic framework, and they were given the obligation. Everybody else, it's optional. It's optional. Have children, not have children. It's up to you. The next mitzvah we started with last week, and I want to continue on this week, is the mitzvah, which Ron puts as the first mitzvah, Leda Sheyesh Sham Eloka, to know that there is a God. That's what Ron puts as the very first mitzvah. Does anybody know where the source of that mitzvah is? Where can I find, what's the verse source? Where is that mentioned?
It should be in the Mitzvah.
It isn't Ten Commandments. Where? First one. Shit, look at that. All right. Then the pasuk is Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Tzitzicha Mitzrayim Beis Avadim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. Strange again. Second thing is there's no command there. It's a declarative statement. Strange. Okay. So we're going to get into that. Okay. So just to I'm going to do sort of a combination of review and a little bit of expansion. So the way to appreciate the narrative in the Ten Commandments is to understand the journey of mind the Jews went through. Has anybody here heard of the Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Right. Okay. So what happened was in August of 1973, there was a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, and these bank robbers came in, and they took for 5 days several bank employees, and while they're negotiating with the police for to work out a deal, and then they had the most unbelievable thing occur, which they did not expect. is that they try to help. They try to help the captors, the hostages, and they refused help. And they were becoming emotionally bonded to the hostage takers, to the terrorists, to the bank robbers. And then they even defended the captors after they were freed after their 6-day ordeal. The question is, what is the phenomenon of that? We have people in mental health. They want to get this with a right. So, but you can just say that. But what's the cause of that?
It's too intolerable to feel like a helpless victim. I would be correct.
Right. So that's Freud's theory. Freud's theory is that it's really it is a defense mechanism, that your ego is being depleted because you are under control of nothing. So therefore, you start to identify with and create a solidarity with your oppressors. And when they especially the key thing they saw in the FBI description of this, they have to do some element of good. If they allow you to sleep, then it bonds it really good. So they say it's a full over 20% of hostage situations have this case situation, but it has to be strangers. If it's like your deranged uncle, then that's not going to happen. You're not bonding that guy. So, so that's an interesting phenomenon. I bring that up purely to entertain you. No, I bring that up because it's actually relevant to our Fuller story. Because I want to start with a baseline of where the Jews started with. Because I'm going to read with you the story in chapter 3 in Exodus, in Shemot. And it says that, as you know, Moshe was adopted by the daughter of Paro, and he lives life in the palace. And then something more shocking, around 20, we don't get his exact age, he goes out, he goes out to his brethren. And what does he encounter? What's the first thing he sees? Can I remember? It was one of the Chumash homers we gave you 100 years ago. Come on, don't you remember? Excellent, Gilad. Correct. He sees there's an Egyptian taskmaster who's beating the Jew, and what does he do in response? He looks to the left and then to the right to make sure that the coast was clear, and he strikes him dead, and then he buries him in the sand. And then the next day, then Moshe, you think, you take a little break on this, little escapade going on here. The next day, what does he do? He goes out again. What does he see the next day? Day number 2. Anybody remember? 3rd chapter of the Shemot. You see Jews, yeah? He sees 2 Jews fighting. And he says to the wicked who's like the aggressor, why are you beating your fellow Jew? And then the guy says, Mi samchel asur v'shofet alinu. Who made you the officer and the judge upon us? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptians? At that point, Moshe was petrified, because he knew that the matter had gotten out. And of course, Paro heard and dispatched his forces to kill him, and Moshe had to run and spent literally over 50 years of his life running from the law. And the scene comes back with him by the well, and he's already nearly 80 years old because he comes to Egypt and he's 80. So let's say he was at 75 and he got married to Zipporah, and they only have 2 little kids, so maybe 70. So he's running and that part of his life is not recorded in the Torah. So there's a whole part of Moshe's life, which is him running, from country to country, because the long arm of the law of Egypt's empire was fierce. And God says, you can go back to Egypt because everybody wants you dead now. They themselves have died. So that was obviously a deep fear of Moshe, that he's not going to go back to Egypt because he killed. He became a fugitive and an enemy of the state. Going back, how did those 2 Jews find out that he had killed the Jew, the Egyptian? If there was nobody around and the Egyptian's not talking, right? Presumably he's buried, he's dead and buried. How did these Jews the next day find out?
The Egyptian had to flee.
But how do you know that Moshe did it? Maybe the guy's on vacation.
Trying to connect us to the
Okay, well, I'm not going to give you everything. I'll make you think a little bit. What? The Jew who was saved and rescued, blabbered it, which was crazy. Moshe went on a profound limb, risked his safety, and certainly his position and his, aristocratic lifestyle, living in the palace. I mean, walking through gilded hallways. I mean, you can imagine being you were the most spoiled person in the known world, and gave it all up to execute justice on behalf of people that he didn't grow up with. He never had a Jewish education. He never grew up with Jewish friends. He didn't live in a Jewish community. He had everything that would be a reason to be involved in assimilation. He had all the pros to be involved in assimilation, and he wasn't. You already see the guy's an interesting guy. So it's interesting that the Jews at this point had sunk to the level they were completely acculturated into Egyptians, and so much so that they actually valued and romanticized and viewed as their heroes their oppressors. That because in one day, do you understand how much the internet has to be flying to be able to get that information out without a phone, a cell phone? It's unbelievable. Everybody's yakking up a storm. That means that guy immediately went back to camp and told everybody, "You will not believe this." And so, so the bottom line is that what was the level of the Jews? What was their absolute bottom? They were not only absorbed into Egyptian culture, and even though they were in the bottom rung of the socioeconomic little thing, they felt good about it. They felt good about being part of that society, even though they were on the lowest rung. Now, obviously, do not make the mistake that Paro was not a genius in propaganda. In the same way that Hitler and Goebbels were masters in propaganda and tricking the Jews during the Holocaust and creating these sense of false hopes and all kinds of manipulations, they did the similar thing. The Midrashim actually give method of how to get the Jews who were invited by the vizier of the country to be official guests. Suddenly they end up to be slaves. It didn't happen in 1 second. So they say they'll be if you're a good Egyptian, you'll help out with the public works. And there was a slow grabbing in by the weakness of their Achilles heel for them to be loved and admired as being good Egyptian citizens. So that's where the baseline was. To the extent that the one guy who was trying to rescue them, who's giving his all, they completely endanger the guy, and he was in danger. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So much so that Moshe felt, by the way, in his discussion with God, he didn't feel already at all. I mean, these are the people. They're not redeemable. And that's the metaphor of the burning bush. And there's the burning bush. The Jews are the bush. The fire is the Egyptian oppression, and there's the angel of God in the center. And he's shocked that they're not being completely crushed. But if it wasn't for the divine providence that's holding them on by a thread and a half, they would be completely consumed. That's the metaphor of that was the imagery of the burning bush. The Jews should be completely burnt up. I don't understand why they're not burnt up. I understand. It should be crushed by the cemetery force, by all the abuse of Egypt. Cannot imagine that. Okay, so that's point number one. Let's go to baseline level 1. Let's fast forward. So right now, how do they look at? Let's go ask you about how do they look at Egypt and by extension Paro? Absolutely, but even in addition to that, how do they look at Paro himself, and how did Paro present himself? The big godlike, right, as being a channeler of the divine, as being this mystic creature. So therefore, they're not. And who is the source of power himself? So they got to be on his good side for sure. So then you get to the Makot. Then we get to the plagues. We go to chapter 9, and we're going to sort of a phase number 2 that you're going to. Chapter 9 is after the 7th plague, which is hail. It says like this. So Hashem said, the God of the Hebrews, this is all a review, send out my people that may serve me. For this time I send all my plagues against your heart and upon your servants and your people, so you will know that there's none like me in all the world. For now I have sent my hand and stricken you and your people with the pestilence, and you would have been obliterated from the earth. However, for this have I let you endure, in order that you may show you my strength, that my name will be declared throughout the world. What was the goal of the Makot? That's what it is. God tells Moshe, go to Paro. I can really wipe you out in 1 second. The neutron bomb approach of Makot. One and done. But he didn't. What was the objective?
To weaken their belief. Or to strengthen their belief in God, weaken their belief in God.
Okay, exactly. Because those are exactly those things are symbiotically connected because really they now associate as a source of power is Paro and the state. And therefore, by showing that he's nothing, that he has to admit that he is powerless opposite God is part of their evolution. Okay. Now, are they believers in God really fully, or are they still members of the state of Egypt?
$100.
Still members. Now, their big breakthrough is really what is preparation for the Exodus, which is what mitzvah is the mitzvah al Korban Pesach, and then in order to do that, Brit Milah, because basically they're taking the God of Egypt and eating it, slaughtering it and roasting it and openly. And then in order to do burn it whole. They can't make it into little patties. You got to burn it, roast it whole, and they have to do bris milah as well to do that. So they have to reestablish their connection to the Abrahamic covenant. So that's now the Midrash said that not every Jew was able to do that, and many Jews were stuck in Egypt, etc. So that's a major step. But were they fully liberated at that point in time when they left Egypt? No, they were not. When did they become liberated? When was the level of a major qualitative step in their redemption process? What? That's the end. There's a step prior to that. A substantial inflection point.
When was the part where they had to wait on the manna?
They leave, then they have roughly 7 days later they have the splitting of the Red Sea, and they have then a month later they have the getting of the man. They accept the proto Shabbos. They have two obligations of the Shabbos. Don't gather man and don't leave the borders of the camp. And then they show up to Sinai, and they get the 10 Commandments on the 49th day. It's the basic chronology. So if you go to chapter 4, well that's Nachshon. Not everybody. That's why it's Nachshon. But the major breakthrough is after the result of the splitting the Red Sea. When I go to chapter 14, and where it says they saw on that day Hashem saved Israel from the hand of Egypt, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And Israel saw the great hand that Hashem had put upon Egypt, and the people revered Hashem. They had faith, they believed in Hashem and Moshe served. But what qualitatively changed?
Well, they saw God's power in that, and that's where they saw that there was like a destructive side, like something like to be sort of in awe of, more
Correct.
so than just someone that was doing something to other people,
So, but what made it so? Why did they then believe in Hashem and then they believed in Moshe and servant? Why? What was the main thing that caused that internal change? Because you could say, the 10 Commandments, the plague of the firstborn is inconsequential. It's pretty good. I mean, it's not too. I mean, as plays go, not too shabby. I mean, as plays go, that's pretty good. What was it about the Kriyat Yam Suf, the splitting of the Red Sea, and the drowning of the Egyptian Delta Force in Paro as well, that made that qualitative change?
Go ahead.
Good.
I was say, they had a state in
What-
it. So,
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, by virtue of, the fact that they had to go, right?
Well, they didn't jump. Well, it says that the wind blew and they created. They walked through a dry land, and then the Egyptians followed them, and then they closed up and they were drowned. They were still pretty passive. The key thing is that they saw clearly the death of the being that they mythologically imagined being a source of some measure of power, which would be Paro and his force, was zero. Hashem, and they saw the Yad Hagdolah, the great hand of Hashem. So and then on that, it was removed from the entire equation.
Eventually, you had to decimate in order to Because I've asked that question myself before. Like each of the templates seem like they're significant enough. Like what's different about any one of them?
Correct.
Why, like cumulatively, why they have more impact, but
Right.
why individually anyone would have more impact than another.
So the way to understand it is that the Makot were to be perceived as 10 lessons to Paro and the Egyptians and the Jewish people. And ultimately, the Jews did not fully grasp that till they experienced the Kriyat Yam Suf, because that already saw, it all came together at that point. Because in other words, their image of source of force was still, to a certain measure, was still Paro and his empire. Remember, they were the superpower. Now they saw clearly he's nothing. And that's why Moshe, in his song to them, he calls Hashem Ish Melchama, Hashem Shemo. God is the source, God is a man of war, his name, and God is his name. Now, this is what I discussed last week, is that, but it's still, their concept of God is very limited. What was the limited view of their perspective of Hashem?
Because that was just a force. It wasn't like.
It's a force and limited to their material well-being. In other words, nothing to do with God of the universe or God of the cosmos or God of anything. Just, in other words, the being that bails our tuchus out, who's bigger than the next guy. It's very small. And what we shared last week is because the contemporary analogy is that imagine the Jews who had just been freed from the death camps. They've endured unbelievable psychological sense of crushing. So they're very passive. They're reactive. They've been given a major blow. So to remove that sense of slave mentality out of the Jews is not going to happen in 5 minutes. That's the key point here. In other words, the Jew who walked out of Bergen-Belsen in 1945, when he's now in Israel and it's 1957 and they just won the Sinai War, or after 1967 they just won the unbelievable 6-Day War, that's already a completely different experience. There's fundamental changes going on in the psyche of the Jew. Okay, so this is stage number 3, where they have a perception of Hashem, but still limited to the realm of survival, their personal existence. God. They're viewing, Yad Gedola, the great hand, versus the Yad Mitzrayim. They're still looking as far as who has superior force. Still a limited view of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Then we get to really our thing was that what Gilad mentioned before was Mount Sinai. Just go to chapter 19, and the Jews have been brought, and it says like this. The Jews are brought to Sinai, and it says like this: God, Moshe sent it to God, and Hashem called to them on the mount, saying, "So shall you say to the house of Jacob and relate to the children of Egypt, you have seen what I did to Egypt." Well, obviously they did. Weren't they just experienced 49 days ago? And I've borne you on the wings of eagles and brought you to me. And now I've hearkened you, and if you hearken well to me and observe my covenant, you shall be to me the most beloved treasure of all people, for mine is the entire world. You shall be to me a kingdom of ministers and a holy nation. So what does it mean to be, they're brought to me, the big M, on the backs of wings of eagles? The one, of course, eagles was the superior bird of the sky. So there's obviously being protected, there's an element of protection. There's obviously being fast-tracked to a new level of perspective. And the way that we framed it last week was going from a passive slave mentality-oriented person to an active decision maker. Going from a kingdom of slaves to an eligible to be a member of a kingdom of ministers, which is a different mentality, way different. So that's why I say so. But Hashem's asking to reflect upon, going back to Shira's question, they're asking to reflect upon the very same thing, the what I did to Egypt. Well, didn't they experience it? No. Because literally who you are and what your vantage point is, you're going to see the same event in literally different ways. In other words, who sang a song at the splitting of the Red Sea? Who led them in song? Moshe. Yeah, Moshe. Why didn't they let them sing? Weren't they feeling pretty good about being redeemed? but he was able to frame, he's going to be able, through the poem, through the song, to frame, this is the best takeaway that you can have. And just repeat after me this song. Because he, you know what I'm saying? Because he already had a broader perspective. Or it wasn't completely abstracted. It was still a song. It was still God is a man of war. You know what I mean? He's still talking in the metaphors that relate to them. But he's starting to lift them up. And now they're now being lifted up even further. This is the introduction with the idea of therefore, when God says, I am Hashem your God, Lord your God who took you out of the land of Mitzrayim, that declarative statement just demands what does that mean? It demands a reflection. To think about that to say that statement demands you have to think about that. But now they can. They're not thinking of who's the greater force. They're now eligible to be able to, and in fact, they're given the choice about the covenant. They say, Nasav Mishal, well, sign us up. We'll do it. Where's the pen? Do it. Okay? But they weren't eligible for it. They were very completely passive, reactive, in a certain sense, scarred. So Hashem fast-tracked them. That is a review of last week. That is an expanded, enhanced view of last week. So I want to start with another element. Okay, let's read a little bit here. Who would like to read this? We're now going to the, we are in Maimonides, chapter 1, halacha 8, and we're going to another dimension here. Okay, Gilad, b'vakasha.
Sorry, behold.
Yeah, behold, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Behold, it is explicitly stated in the Torah and the works of the prophets that the Holy One, blessed be He, is not a body or physical form, as Deuteronomy 4:39 states, because God, your Lord, is the Lord in the heavens above and the earth below, and the body cannot exist in two places simultaneously. Also, Deuteronomy 4:15 states, for you did not see any image, and states, to whom you liken me, with whom I will be equal.
But to whom can you liken me, and with whom will I be equal?
Were he a body, he would resemble other bodies.
Okay, so the Rambam says here, this is part of the mitzvah of the oneness, of knowing the oneness of God, that he's showing that the Torah, the Tanakh itself reflects that idea, because if God had a body, for example, when they had the transcendent moment at Har Sinai, they would have saw something. But it's very simple. God says, you did not see any image. Very important. Okay? And Isaiah says, to whom can you liken me? For whom will I be equal? Now, if God was a body, let's say Jesus, he would have a physical body. All right? He'd have awesome hair. Okay? Jesus always has awesome hair. Anyways. Right. So which is historically not, he looks probably, that's not pretty accurate. He looked Israeli. I mean, he had a nice tan. All right, moving on. Halakha 9, keep on rolling.
If so, what is the meaning of the expressions employed by the Torah below his feet, written by the finger of God, God's hand, God's eyes, God's ears, and the like? All these expressions were used to relate to human thought processes, which know only corporeal imagery. For the Torah speaks in the language of man. They are only descriptive terms, as apparent from Deuteronomy 32:21. I will whet my lightning sword. Does he have a sword? Does he have a sword to kill? Rather, this is metaphoric imagery. All such expressions are metaphoric imagery. The proof of this concept, one prophet says that he saw the Holy One, blessed be He, clothed in snow white, and another vision came coming with crimson garments from Hashem. Moses, our teacher, himself in vision came at the Red Sea as a mighty man breaking forth, and at Mount Sinai saw him as the leader of the congregation wrapped in his feet. This shows that he has no image or form. All these are merely expressions of prophetic vision and imagery, and the truth of this concept cannot be grasped or comprehended by human thought. This is what the verse Job 11:7 states. When you find the comprehension of God, when you find the ultimate bounds of the Almighty.
Right. Okay, so the Rambam just to summarize, on one hand, so we say that God is not physical. So the problem is, we open up the Chumash, he is physical all over. He's got the hand of God, the eyes of God, the God, it's all over the place. So his answer is Dibra Torah Lashon B'nei Adam. The Torah speaks in the true language of man, and in order to give man some sort of idea, they use these metaphors. Okay, so the question so for example, in the one that we just did by this splitting the Red Sea, which he relates to as well, is it God? What does it mean that when it says God is a man of war? Hashem ish melchama, Hashem shema. What does that mean? So we obviously he's not literally a warrior. He's not he's not a fierce ninja fighter.
We do understand that, like, he is really fierce, violent,
Okay.
which he presents, what his capabilities.
Right, and he did, not only does it, he does and he did. Okay, so, but let me ask a simple question. Why? Let's avoid all these problems of saying, and God destroyed Egyptians, or God saved the Jews. Why is it specifically to have such a visceral, vivid, aggressive image of, he's got a sword, and he's killing, and he's hurling chariots into the sea? I mean, what is the value of that? Just say, God was the cause of that. There was a salvation, the Jews were saved, and use no metaphor at all.
The visual is very powerful.
Okay.
It also makes me think of what they're going to show us, right? Back in class, and you asked
Back in the day.
and you asked us what was the significance or what it comes to mind when we think of powerful. And we didn't think of things like resurrecting the dead. That wasn't like
Right.
not
Not on our list. No, it was not.
So just kind of what speaks to us as a whole. What do most people relate to?
So you're saying that they're going to pit in order to bring the point home in the strongest possible way is going to find the most powerful poetic image. So God visualizing a powerful warrior like a Goliath-like creature, slaying the opponent is
that
better.
we can relate to. It makes it feel real. Like we can conjure up something we don't understand, we don't see, we don't hear, we don't taste, we don't smell. So how can we relate? Sort of filling that void.
But you can argue, but isn't that counterproductive?
It gives you something to hold on to.
But you're holding on to a fantasy. You're saying that God's not physical, so you're making the situation worse.
We create categories and box people in all the time. We do the same thing. We create constructs to be able to understand things.
It's true, but this is a construct, which is the more we construct, the more wrong we are. The backward, the worse it gets. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's personification, which, can be a slippery slope, right?
Right. It can be a slippery slope.
Kind of deification of human beings.
Right. Not good. So just say that what will be so terrible, we'll give up, I agree with Shir, we'll give up on the advantage of making it poetically powerful. I'll just go with God saved the Jews. God destroyed the Egyptians. Just say that. I want to say God is a man of war. I mean,
Maybe because it's too hard for us to, I guess you have to simplify in order to build further on. So we're taking necessary simplification that lets us then move on to make a better memory.
you have to say that, or else the Torah is really hurt. If the whole goal of the Torah is to have a relationship with God, and you're essentially the Torah itself is making a distance from God, obviously you have to say this is a necessary step. You have to say that. I want to get into that. Our goal for today in the next 10 minutes, to get right to the point, is exactly what is that educational breakthrough that this idea is. So I wrote a little question on question number C over here. In the rat race world that the Jews lived in Egypt, where did they see themselves in the political order in regards to the Egyptians, in regards to Torah? Where do they see themselves in that whole spectrum of things?
And if we went with the same theory you described earlier, then they're low socioeconomic class, low politically, and they're doing everything they can to climb the ladder.
That's right. But they're, in other words, in other words, but they accept the ladder. In other words, I may be low on the. In other words, this is my ladder. I value this ladder, and I want to move up the ladder. In fact, one of the things that one of the remarkable exchanges that after Moshe goes to Paro the first time, says, we're going to come redeem, let the Jews go for 3-day festival, and then Paro, attacks him back, says, yeah, no straw. You have to have the same quota, no straw, and just crushes them. So the Jews complain. One is that you've given him a sword to kill us, but also you've made us stinky in his eyes. Which is, in other words, you've reduced our position in the Egyptians' eyes. In other words, they, which means that what? That they really care of what the Egyptians thought about them. Now you think, you're working in the Egyptian sun, day and night. You care about that they're now going to have, they're going to look down upon me? You're a slave. There's between you and the bottom, there's not too much space over there. You're way on the bottom. Did you see an interesting thing? They did care. We're still on the ladder. We may have the last run, but we're on the ladder. Okay? So that's huge. And on the top of the ladder, of course, it resides Paro. So the key point here is that what Shira is saying is that it's a valuable thing to have a powerful poetic image, is true. Is that, and that all these images need to be what they call reframed, which is that in their mind, the dominant God creature is Paro. So that needs to be reframed. In other words, all the images which are natural to all human beings have to be put onto the table and to be upgraded, if you will, to their authentic images. You know what I'm saying? In other words, right now, Paro is the man, is the Lord, and is the source of force, and is the mighty warrior. So you need to reframe that exact image to see that differently. In other words, it's a psychologically necessary step. You can't skip steps. You want to think you're this abstract philosopher king? Not so fast. You got to start from the ground. You got to start from ground zero. Because right now, we ourselves do that. We look at, how do you look at when you let's say guys in Goldman Sachs, right? He's a summer intern. Okay, he's on the lowest level. He's getting the guy coffee. It's essentially, and he's like on a quarter cubicle. He's like sitting on the edge of a seat. He's got like nothing, right? But he's got a little tag there. He's got a little tag. He's one of the 37,000 employees, but he's in there. I'm in Goldman Sachs, but he's like nothing. You like, would you like Splenda or Sweet and Love? That's where he's holding in the Goldman Sachs thing. So let's say he's up there, and then Lloyd Blankfein, who's the CEO, president, chairman of the board, walks in. He's having the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Hashem below Karkvodo. His glory is filling. He's having that experience, but he's ascribing it to the mighty economic being called the CEO of the largest bank in largest banking force in America or the world, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? He's really, if he's honest with himself, he's ascribing mystical, mythological power to this guy. And that's natural. So Hashem is taking the Jews by the hand and taking all these images, and all these metaphors, which they invest in human power and human metaphors, and exchanging that with the true source of power. So it's not that you need to do some metaphors because they won't understand abstraction. No, they have to. These metaphors are happening all the time. You need to take them, put them on the table, and reframe them and exchange them for their valid perception.
So could that be now we have less need for this?
We don't. I mean, we all know. It depends on the person, but the truth is that we may not tumble all the way back to Mitzrayim. We may not be on the same level, but the struggle between Mitzrayim and the Beit HaMikdash, which is what Moshe talks about, that continuum, we're always, we're sliding up and back. Not so simple. It's, yeah.
Like a similar concept we talked about. I think we talked once about offerings and why we had this whole period because why didn't we just go right to prayer services?
Right.
And you said, well, we can't quite, if I remember, you can't quite go there. You need to have something that relates to the period of time that people could accept. It was like a progression away from something that was intolerant.
In other words, that point is a corollary point that God utilized the cultural elements that was appropriate for them. You know, saying there was a world that used korbanot, but now we're going to use offerings toward the right objective. Okay, in other words, to use the metaphor, to use the cultural heritage, the religious heritage they had, and redirect it to the proper end. It was exactly the same point. But even more primary, even how we talk about God is Yad Hashem, God's hand. He doesn't have a hand; it's God's force. But again, we in our mind we think that Adam Smith, the 1700s philosopher and founding father of economics, called the guiding hand. That essentially there's a guiding invisible hand that's guiding capitalism. That buyers themselves will work rationally toward working out the right deal. He literally talks about it as a yad, talks about it as a hand, as a guiding force. So we now to see what the source of that guiding force is a Kadosh Baruch Hu, not a material being. That's what's really that's the reframing going on. So you need to have the metaphor, not just because we can understand it, but to understand it and to upgrade. It's an upgrade process. As we walk up to the top of Har Sinai, as it were, the Jews are getting a much more sophisticated understanding, which allows them to have the most mature sense of Hashem. They couldn't have their sense of Hashem was limited in Mitzrayim because they have all these competing images of what is the source of force, and there's magic, and there's all these different kind of mystical notions running through their mind. That's not going to get removed in one day. It's a long journey.
So there's an element of it's slightly misleading in that it's only a metaphor, not the whole truth. So when it says that God guided Moses with the Torah written that
it's Elohim, right?
So in reality, it's much way more complicated.
Yes.
And it could be that maybe Moses didn't hear any voice. It could be that the voice could be a process that happened that could be attributed to God, but it might not be.
Well, the nevuah is not a voice because voice requires a sound box. God doesn't have a mouth, so that itself is a metaphor. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. God spoke to Hashem.
So sometimes I think that God has come to God in the same way people come to God. It's recreated, but God is sort of the guiding force behind us.
So that let's gonna get to we'll explore that more about the idea of prophecy, but the idea is the way that at least Maimonides explains nevuah as being there is all of us here has had the aha moment or that sense of clarity where you get the clearness of an idea. A nevuah is in the same class of that, but the clarity is coming from you feel it's coming from without. It's in the realm of wisdom, but it's coming from. So that was Moshe had this kind of this profound insight, which we call nevuah. Now that's a whole study. We'll get to that. It's in Yesodei Torah and the foundations in the whole 7th and 8th chapter of the 10 chapters. It's foundational, but we'll go into that whole thing.
I don't know. This might be so good, but it reminds me so.
Good.
So growing up in church, the way they explained to us why Jesus is exactly what you're describing here, but to another degree. Not only can we not connect to God in the abstract space, the personification even enough, but it was still too distant from humans to connect to God. So therefore, we had to have God come in.
Physical metaphors, physical human, right. Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that. So for that very reason, we're not allowed to add to what the Torah says in the description of God. For that very reason, because it's very dangerous. No, we only have 3 adjectives of God. Hakel, we say it in Amidah. Hagadol, Hagivor, Vanoah. 3 attributes. It's true that God doesn't only have attributes either, but great, mighty, and awesome. We don't say anything more than Moshe said. But for that very reason, because, this guy needs a little more. He needs a little more. It's too abstract. We have a help him out. We're good. Right, no. So that's what, going back to when we studied we talked about the story of Enosh. Enosh, also, he believed in an abstract, metaphysical being, but he says, in our service, we're going to make a little analogy. God's a king, and he has a servant, so the sun and moon. And just like you give honor to the servants, the king gives honor indirectly to the king, you can give honor to the servants, in other words, the sun, the moon, the sea. And that became a avodah zarah, a strange service. He had a right notion of God, but his service, he had a metaphor which was not appropriate, which allowed the whole thing to get lost. So it's so this is that's why the laws of idolatry is super, super regulated. It's super machmir. Now we can't even say like a house of idolatry. You can't even say you can't even say it's nice. You can't even say it's nice because you have to. Well, maybe it is nice. Maybe objectively it conforms to all the excellence of beauty and architecture. But because there's such a draw to having tangible, visceral metaphors of the divine, it's something that has to be, the most highest mechitza have to be built. You know what I'm saying? Because it's unbelievable. It's a narcotic. It's simply a narcotic. So that's what I wanted to accomplish today. So that's what, to put it all together. So that's why with all this narrative, we really went from chapter 3 through chapter 20 in Exodus as being the narrative background. So how, when the mitzvah comes, I am Hashem your God, you understand who is he speaking to and what was the journey he took, so you can understand how the mitzvah can be to know God. Because they're on that process of growing in their knowing. And he's taking them on that journey through many, many steps. And I'm only giving you some of the major, there are a couple mini steps also in between that, but I'm giving you the major breakdown. So really I'm trying to show you, as the Rambam talks about, you have the Torah and the mitzvah, the narrative, the Torah Shabbat, the written, and then there's the mitzvah coming in and adding the rigorous structure of the mitzvah, and how these things work together. The oral law and the written law work together.
So if the Torah speaks in the language of man,
yes,
and Moses wrote the Torah
yes,
with God's guidance, did Moses get the language of God and then he transcribed it to the language of man? Or did he also just have a more simplistic?
So Hashem communicated what he's going to say. Now, interestingly enough, in other words, that's a whole juicy topic, right? But I'm going to give you the somewhat unsatisfying short answer is that Maimonides maintains that he dictated the Torah to him. Now, the fifth book of Moshe, what's called Deuteronomy, it's Moshe speaking, but his formulation became that was good. In other words, that became part of the canon, part of the text. And the Torah is written, so therefore it can have, as you see, the same thing can be perceived on multiple levels. Just as the same Jews are looking at what experience to themselves, the makot, on multiple levels, depending on what their context is. All these narratives are written for having a multiple level of perception and perspective. And the oral law is going to highlight one dimension, a certain dimension, which if you have a rich context of the written Torah, you'll understand what it's driving at. And that's what the Mishnah Torah is all about. So I want to share now. All right.
Thank you very much.